Centuries ago, the fate of a royal child shaped the destiny of an entire nation. Heirs were groomed from birth, trained for war, diplomacy, and leadership. But what if a royal child was born different? What if that child could not speak clearly, could not walk easily, or struggled to learn? Thighs of kings and queens? That was not just a family tragedy, it was a scandal. Throughout history, countless royal children born with disabilities were hidden from the world, institutionalized, or even declared dead while still alive. Their very existence threatened the image of perfection that monarchies relied upon. This is the forgotten story of royal children born with Down syndrome. A genetic condition thought was feared and misunderstood for centuries, and the shocking ways their families treated them to protect royal reputation. Down syndrome. Down syndrome is a genetic condition caused by the presence of an extra chromosome. Most people have 46 chromosomes, but individuals with Down syndrome have 47. This extra copy of chromosome 21 changes the way their bodies and brains develop, leading to differences in physical appearance, muscle tone, and intellectual abilities. People with Down syndrome often have distinct features as almond-shaped eyes, a flatter face, smaller ears, and a single crease in the palm of the hand. They may experience health challenges such as Asher defects, thyroid conditions, and developmental delays. Today, we know that people with Down syndrome can live full and meaningful lives. But in centuries past, before medical science understood genetics, these differences were feared. Many believed they were a curse from God, a sign of weak bloodlines, or even evidence of moral failing. And in royal families where every heir was expected to embody strength and perfection, a child with Down syndrome was often treated as an unbearable shame. The Lion sister Snarissa Bowes Lyon was born in 1919, and her younger sister, Catherine, was born in 1906. They were first cousins of Queen Elizabeth II and part of the extended British royal family. From a young age, it became clear that the sisters had severe intellectual disabilities, and Itis believed that one or both may have had Down syndrome or a closely related condition. Rather than raising them in the royal household, the family decided to place them in the Royal Earl's Wood Hospital, a long-term institution in Surrey. Once they were sent there, these sisters were effectively erased from public memory. In an even more shocking twist, official family records falsely listed both sisters as deceased. Even though they were alive and living in the hospital, Nasa remained at Earswood until her death in 1986, and Catherine lived there for nearly her entire life until she died in 2014. The sisters reported received very few visits from their relatives. For decades, no one outside the institution knew who they were, or if that they were members of the Royale. Their story only came to light in the 1980s when journalists discovered their existence, sparking outrage and public debate about the way they had been treated. This case demonstrates even well into the 20th century. Royal families still preferred to hide their relatives with disabilities rather than support them openly. The fear of scandal outweighed compassion. Princess Alexandria of Prussia, was born in 1915, the daughter of Crown Prince Wilhelm of Prussia. She was diagnosed with Down syndrome, though the term was not widely used at the time. Alexandrian's story is somewhat different from that of Nerissa and Catherine because her parents chose not to institutionalize her. She remained with her family and was occasionally seen in public. In fact, she even appeared in some family photographs and commemorative postcards. However, this does not mean that her life was free from stigma. Alexandrian was excluded from royal duties and kept out of the public eye as much as possible. She attended a special school and lived quietly with her family, away from demands and scrutiny that came with royal life. She lived a relative life and survived well into adulthood, passing away in 1980. Yet, even in her case, the underlying message was clear. Children with disabilities scowled, beloved privately, but they weren't ever to be part of the monarchic image. Anne de Gaulle. Born in 1928, was the daughter of Charles de Gaulle. The Monarch would become president of France, and his wife Yvonne. Anne was born with Down syndrome, and although she was not part of a royal family, she was a member of one of the most prominent families in Europe. Unlike many children with Down syndrome at the time, Anne was raised at home rather than being placed in an institution. She was deeply cherished by her parents, especially by her father, who was said to have a close and tender bond with her. However, Anne was still largely shielded from the public. Her condition was not openly discussed, and rarely appeared at official events, tragically, and died at the age of 20 from pneumonia. Her death deeply affected her family, and in her memory, Yvonne Dole founded the foundation Untold, a hospital dedicated to caring for children with disabilities. And Nesteri is a rare example of compassion and inclusion at a time when suicitudes were uncommon. But it still reflected the social pressures of Thera. These examples from the 20th century are well demented, but they likely represent only a fraction of the true number of royal children born with Down syndrome or other disabilities throughout history. In medieval and early modern times, children who were born with visible differences or intellectual disabilities were often treated even more harshly. Historical lectures suggest that such children were sometimes abandoned, sent to live in remote estates, or given to monasteries or convents, where they would live out their lives in obscurity because royal families were obsessed with maintaining the appearance, off-strength, and divine favor. A child Hoas, perceived as imperfect, could be seen as a threat to the throne itself. Some historians believe that infants with severe disabilities were quietly killed shortly after birth, though direct evidence is scarce because these actions were deliberately concealed. This culture of secrecy and shame was not unique to any one monarchy. It was spread monarchies across Europe and other parts of the world relied on myth and image as much as military and political power. Admitting that a royal bloodline had produced a child with a disability was considered unthinkable. The result was a legacy of isolation and erasure. Countless children were denied love and acceptance. They deserved simply because they did not meet society's definition of perfect. Today, the world is very different. People with Down syndrome now have access to education, healthcare, and social support systems that allow them to live long, fulfilling lives. They go to school, build careers, form relationships, and contribute immensely to their communities. They act, teach, compete in sports, run businesses, and inspire others throughout their achievements. More importantly, they are seen, valued, and loved. Open lifer, who they are. But it is important to remember that this progress is very recent in the grand scope of history. Only a few generations ago, things were tragically different. The lives of Nerissa and Catherine Bowes-Lyon, Princess Alexandrine of Prussia, and Angel remind us that not so long ago, children born with Down syndrome, even those born into privilege, wealth, and power, were often hidden away, locked behind closed doors, denied the opportunity to live a full life. These children did not receive the same smiles, attention, or opportunities as their siblings. Their very existence was viewed by many royal families as an embarrassment, a flaw in the bloodline, or even a divine punishment. They were deliberately erased from the public record because their parents and relatives feared how society would judge them. Their names, their faces, and their lives were carefully omitted from official histories and public appearances. They were made invisible in the eyes of the world. For decades, many of these children lived in isolation. Some were placed in cold, overcrowded institutions where they were rarely a fever visited by family. Others were sent to distant estates or hidden in monasteries, away from the eyes of curious courtiers and citizens. They lived lives that history was never meant to record. But just because their stories were buried does not mean they did not matter. History is full of triumphs and tragedies of kings and queens who shaped nations and led armies. But some of the greatest injustice are the ones that were never meant to be seen. The quiet suffering aftos who were deliberately forgotten. The children we have spoken about today lived in a time when disability was considered shameful, a secret to be covered up at all costs. Their lives, however, were just as precious and meaningful as those of any king, queen, prince, or princess. By remembering them now, we are doing something powerful. We're giving them the dignity and recognition that they were once denied. We are ensuring that they are not just statistics or whispered rumors, but human beings who deserve to be loved and celebrated. We also remind ourselves of how fragile progress can be. It is easy to look at the opportunities available to people with Down syndrome today and think that the battle for equality has been won. But discrimination and stigma still exist, and history teaches us how quickly compassion can give way to fear and secrecy. When image and reputation are valued above humanity, these children's stories are more than just sad chapters in royal history. They are lessons. They remind us that no family, no matter how powerful, is immune to the fear of judgment. They remind us of the pain that secrecy and shame can cause, and they challenge us even today to be a society that does not hide or marginalize those who are different, but embraces them fully as part of our shared human story. By telling the stories of Nerissa and Catherine Bosleyan, Princess Alexandrian of Prussia, and Gaul, and countless others, whose names we may never know, we honor their memory. We bring their lives out of the shadows and into the light where they always belonged. And perhaps by doing so, we can ensure that no child, royal or otherwise, will ever again be treated as a secret to be hidden away. Because if your child, no matter their ability, no matter their difference, deserves to be beloved, to be seen, and to have their story remembered.